Okay, this will blow your mind.
The views expressed on the following broadcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions of KHLT Recovery Broadcasting or its affiliates. The dialogue on this show should not be considered as medical, psychiatric, or professional advice and is delivered only as personal opinions from the host, co-host, and guest. KHLT Recovery Broadcasting is not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
Okay.
If you've heard what he's about to say for the 100th time,
I want this network to be different. I don't want it to be like all the other talk radio networks.
You're such a great resource, Monty, to people who are struggling and suffering and people in recovery.
Monty, first let me say it's a pleasure to be a part of your show. We really believe in what you're doing.
you've heard 100 times what Monty has said. You've learned to turn down the volume when Monty talks.
What are you going to find when you go to Take 12 Recovery Radio?
You are going to have a spiritual experience.
And now, here's your host, the Monty Man.
And there y'all are. Welcome, my friends. I'm your host, the Monty Man. Derek is here. And Roger is on the phone. Welcome to another fine episode of the Take 12 Recovery Radio Show, the world's original and oldest recovery talk and recovery music radio station and podcast. And we are glad you're with us. The topic this week, the importance of 12-step history, and why that's important, and why if you are invested in any way, shape, or form within a recovery fellowship, particularly the one that adheres to the 12 steps, I would hope that you would have an interest that would go beyond just reading steps on the wall, drinking bad coffee, and complaining about your significant others. But sometimes that's not always the case. So we want to encourage those of you who, if that's what your recovery program is limited to maybe dig a little deeper. But before we do that, let's say hi to Roger. Hi, Roger in Huntington Beach.
Good morning, everybody. I'm doing quite well. Huntington Beach is a glorious day today. This is Monday morning, and it's a monkey time.
Yeah. And there over there, if you're watching on YouTube, there is Derek the A-8er.
Good morning. It's a good day.
Good morning, my brother. And he's sporting his Take 12 Recovery Radio shirt, as am I. And there you go. So, let's see here. Before we do any of that, though, we probably want to complain a little bit, right?
Sure.
Don't we want to complain a little bit?
Pretty good at that.
Yeah. I don't know why not.
The Monty whines tonight. The Monty Man whines and grinds. That's right, everybody. It's that dreaded time for the Monty Man's weekly whine.
Dreaded. I love the baby.
Me too.
The baby's so cool. I don't know if any of you have seen this on the news as of late, but my wife and I we were like, you got to be kidding me, right? Refrigerators for children.
Oh, wow.
In their bedrooms. Okay, now, mini fridges aren't anything new. We had one here in the studio for a long time. A lot of people with offices have them, right? Mm-hmm. I know out at the Adult and Teen Challenge Center, we got a couple staff members that have one in their office, right?
Yep.
So they keep their coffee creamer in it and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Maybe even mom and dad might have one in their bedroom, I suppose, possibly. But there's a push now for these child-friendly mini fridges for your child's bedroom.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, okay, all right. So I remember when getting a telephone in your room, that was a huge deal, right? It was like most parents were going, we're not paying for an extra line.
No.
Are you kidding?
No.
But now we live in a world, right, where you don't have to pay for lines. Unless you're a drug addict. Did you catch that?
Ooh, yeah. Ooh.
You don't. Sorry, I regressed quickly there. You don't have to pay for an extra line. In fact, there's just one flat fee basically, and people have their smartphones.
Yeah.
But that was the big deal, and then it was a little mini television.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And I never did get a phone in my room. I never did get a television in my room.
No.
No. Well, now, right, it's refrigerators. And I'm like, don't we have enough issues with separation of the family unit as it is? Yeah. They got these refrigerators that are decorated like My Little Pony.
Oh, cute.
Blue's Clues, things like that. Mm-hmm. I mean, so they're not for high school kids.
True.
I mean, are you serious? Oh my gosh. And then we wonder why we have this disconnect between parents and children and brothers and sisters and that kind of thing. So there you go. What do you think, Roger? Refrigerator for the kids' room?
That is ridiculous. I can't even fathom why do we need a refrigerator with a, Hello Kitty on it in the kids' room? For what? That's crazy.
Well, if you're Jeffrey Dahmer, you'd keep the kitty in it, I guess.
Ooh.
Man, I'm just rocking it today.
Look at Monty today. He's feeling feisty Monty.
That Black Rifle coffee.
Oh, it's the Black Rifle coffee, yes. Mm-hmm. And I wish we could get them to sponsor this show. I drink enough of that stuff.
No.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's my complaint. There's my whine for this week. Listen, if you're one of these parents that's thinking about, allowing your child to break you down and talk you into giving them a refrigerator, don't do it. Don't do it. Oh my gosh. All right, that's it for the weekly whine for this week. Whining about things I'm powerless over. That's right.
The Monty whines tonight.
All right, don't go away. We'll be back with the topic, the importance of 12-step history. Check this out. Hey there, it's the Monty Man here. Ever wonder if there is more to your recovery than abstinence? Do you feel stuck in your recovery? Well, introducing 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety by popular recovery author Dr. Alan Berger. Recently, I asked Dr. Berger this question. What is one of the main things that you hope people will absorb by reading this book, 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety?
Well, I hope what people are going to get in reading the book is, first of all, excited about the possibilities, because that's the great thing about emotional sobriety, is that it opens up so many doors to our life. It opens up a whole new consciousness. So instead of taking things personally, if we don't take things personally, we can really start to get to know the other person. We can start to understand who they are and see what's going on with them, instead of thinking what they're doing is a reflection of how they feel about me.
In Dr. Berger's new book, you will learn the therapeutic value of self-awareness and recover your true self as you experience emotional sobriety. For your autographed copy of 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety, visit www.abphd.com. Also available on Amazon.
Nothing changes if nothing changes.
This is Tony Morosi from the recovery band Self-Esteem, and we're listening to the Take 12 Recovery Radio Show with the Monty Man on KHLT Broadcasting.
This is Take 12 Recovery Radio. Get it?
Yes, indeedy. Well, welcome back to the show. You have tuned into the world's original and oldest recovery talk and recovery music radio program, the Take 12 Recovery Radio Show. We're broadcasting to you from the studios of KHLT Recovery Broadcasting on the outskirts of beautiful downtown Albany, Oregon. broadcasting. Somebody asked me the other day, so where do we get you on the radio? I said, because we're not in your area. I said, that's the beauty of internet radio.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter what part of the country you're in. We got listeners from Ireland. We've got donations from listeners from Ireland. Dubai, Australia, Huntington Beach. Can you believe it? Huntington Beach.
That's right.
The importance of 12-step history. I think just as human beings, I think we have a tendency. The more that we know about something, the definitely the more we will enjoy it. You know, the more I dig deeper into something I'm passionate about, you know, the more history I know, especially if it's a rich history, the more I value it. The less I know, the less I value it. You know, it's certainly that way with individuals. You know, the more we know about somebody, hopefully, if, you know, it's good stuff, and we get to know them and we open up with each other, the more we value each other. And I think that is certainly the case when it comes to our 12-step fellowships. And I'm afraid, however, that over the years, in some circles, the rich history that lies beneath the surface of the steps hanging on the wall and the meeting agenda, that has been lost. And, or if not lost, it's kind of pushed to the side as maybe not as important as I really think it is. And so I wanted to touch on that. Now, we have done a lot of work here at Take 12 Recovery Radio, digging into the history of the mothership, and I refer to that as Alcoholics Anonymous as the mothership, because they were really the ones that launched this whole 12-step thing forth. You know, preceded by the Oxford Group, and of course, many hundreds, literally, of organizations have sprung up using as permission from Alcoholics Anonymous World Service Office, the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, replacing words like alcohol with life-controlling issues or addiction, or admitted I was powerless over myself, or whatever, but adhering primarily to the outline of the 12 steps. And I think if we don't know the rich history of something, we tend to, we just don't tend to value it as much as we do if we do know it. So I think it's very, very important. So I'm going to read a little something here. Before I do that, though, Roger, why do you think it's important to know the history of something as vital as the 12 steps?
Well, I think it puts context to our program. It puts context to the 12 steps. I didn't really know the history of Alcoholics Anonymous until I was 12 years sober. And it was a bit unsettling to me that no one had shared that information with me. And I kind of came to find out that there were few people that really know the rich history and legacy of how it all began and where it began and how it developed, and, you know, the stories and so forth. It brings great power and insight, I think, into how God moved in a few men's lives when it all began. And there's no fellowship like it in the world. So I think it's important to understand the history and the rich history of how it all began.
Yeah. Yeah. And Derek, you were saying off the air that, you know, that this is kind of new to you, you know, looking into the history of something like that, something like this. Did you two find the same experience, that really the history wasn't talked about much?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of with Roger in that sense.
Yeah.
I'm still very oblivious to the rich history. You're about the only individual I know that talks about it with passion, clarity, confidence. And so for me this morning, this is going to be very informational.
Yeah.
I'm still bankrupt. I'm not rich in that arena.
Well, believe me, I'm still learning too. And I have sat at the feet of several people that I have a lot of respect for, that really do know the history, and coming from the original manuscripts that were written, and some of the other folks, the movers and shakers, if you will, that were at the beginning of this whole thing. And it's just been a fascinating journey for me. And I just want to give a shout out, and they would never boast of themselves. And I will keep to using their last initial. But my good friend, Chris S., who we do basically workshops on historical facts about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Probably one of the most downloaded speakers in the world of the 12 Steps, Chris is. And he would never admit to that, but I will. We do the Walking Through the Big Book series and the Walking Through the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. We're currently doing, and if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see this book. I'm holding it up. The Language of the Heart, Walking Through the Language of the Heart, with myself and Chris. These are the AA co-founders Bill W.'s writings in the Grapevine, which is referred to affectionately by AA members as their meeting in print, from 1944 to 1970. The book includes how Bill came to organize AA's 12 Steps, his first thoughts about the program's 12 traditions, emotional and spiritual growth, and a whole lot more. We are currently doing that workshop, and it's published every Friday here at Take12Radio.com. And we have a dedicated webpage for that. If you click on Recovery Workshops, you'll find all of our workshops that we do with Chris S. Another guy that I credit is Myers R. and Chris R. These guys just know their stuff. I have a ton of respect for them. They're amazing men. Tony M. This guy is... he's had some ups and downs just like all of us, but he's still trudging the road to happy destiny, and he knows his stuff, and he's an interventionist, and just an amazing guy. There's so many people. I would be remiss if I didn't mention our good friend who's now passed on to be with the Lord, and probably the world's most foremost historian on the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, Mr. Dick B. We did a show with him for several years called the AA History Show. And while I'm on that, I just want to mention, and I said I was going to do this on occasion anyway, I recommend to you folks a couple of books. These are by Dick B. The first one here, if you're watching on YouTube, is called A New Light on Alcoholism. I'm holding it up there. And this is God, Sam Shoemaker, and Alcoholics Anonymous. And they're forwards by Nikki Shoemaker, daughter of Sam Shoemaker. Julia Harris, friend of Bill W. and Sam Shoemaker. Karen Pavlin, assistant professor at Penn State. The other book I want to recommend by Dick B., forwarded by Bob Smith, the son of Dr. Robert Smith, co-founder of AA, is called The Good Book and the Big Book. And this is a book on the AA's roots in the Bible. You can also visit Dick B's website for like 34 other books on the history of AA. That website is dickbonrecovery.com. There are other sites. Some of my favorite ones are bigbooksponsorship.org. I'm going to list them here on YouTube, by the way. And we'll have them linked up at Take12Radio.com. Cornerstoneofrecovery.com. Of course, AA.org, NA.org, and CelebrateRecovery.com. You'll find a lot of history on those websites, too. I would encourage you not to just use those websites to print out meeting schedules, but really do some homework. And so I'm going to share with you an article here that some of you may have read a million times, and many of you, I'm sure, have never heard before. And I think it is vital information. Now, we're talking about the mothership. We're talking about where this thing started, Alcoholics Anonymous. And this article reads as such. Bill Wilson, the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, recalls the fateful meeting that changed his life and planted the seed for the 12 steps in the Big Book of AA. Quote, "My musing was interrupted by the telephone. By the way, he was drinking at the time. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. The truth was the old school friend was an old drinking buddy. Then he says in italics, that means pay attention, he was sober. Goes on to say, it was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Rumor had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. I wondered how he had escaped, end quote. But the only thing Ebby Thatcher had escaped from was the slow strangulation of the spirit imposed upon him by alcoholism. Ebby, it turned out, was a member of the Oxford Group, a Christian organization founded by Frank Buckman that believed that the root of all problems were the personal problems of fear and selfishness, and that the solution to living with fear and selfishness was to surrender one's life over to God's plan. An American missionary, Buckman had a life-changing experience at the 1908 Keswick Convention of Evangelical Christians in England. In 1921, he founded a first-century Christian fellowship, which evolved over the next decade into what we now know as the Oxford Group. At the time, the concepts embraced by the Oxford Group were revolutionary. No hierarchy, no templates, no endowments, its workers, no salaries, no plans but God's plan. It was simply a group of people from all walks of life, I want to emphasize that, who had surrendered their lives to God. Their endeavor was to lead a spiritual life under God's guidance, and their purpose was to carry their message so others could do the same. The absence of leadership, members believed ultimate leadership resulted with the Holy Spirit and striven to embrace God's will instead of their own. The piety of its members and the focus on carrying its message of hope to others were ancestors to the 12 steps. A 1936 Good Housekeeping article on the group, in fact, describes it as having neither membership, nor dues, nor paid leaders, nor new theological creed, nor regular meetings. It was simply a fellowship of people who desired to follow a way of life, a determination, and not a denomination. The group recommended meditation and adherence to Christian principles and listed 6 tenets necessary for a spiritual revolution. Here they are. Number 1, men are sinners. Number 2, men can be changed. Number 3, confession is a prerequisite to change. 4, the changed soul has direct access to God. 5, the age of miracles has returned. And 6, those who have been changed must change others. The Oxford Group caught the attention of those working in the fields of psychiatry, psychology, and philosophy of the day. In the early 1930s, a Rhode Island native, Roland Hazard, sought help from the famous Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung for his alcoholism. And by the way, Carl Jung was a genius. And so he was going right to the top if you're going to ask this guy for help. Well, Jung directed Roland to the Oxford Group, believing Roland's case could not be addressed through traditional medicine means and that a spiritual revitalization was necessary. So Roland didn't even feel like he was qualified. Everybody else on the planet did, but medically, but he didn't. He was committed to, there's got to be a spiritual change here, not a medical one. Roland was Ebby's introduction to the Oxford Group, and together the two men embraced its principles as a path to sobriety. It was a sober and transformed Ebby who showed up at Wilson's home in November 1934 with a smile on his face and a soul free of the bondage of the bottle. In the Big Book chapter, Bill's Story, Wilson recounts his witness to Ebby's transformation. Quote, "The door opened and he stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened?" Ebby informed Wilson that he had found religion. But he did no ranting. In a matter-of-fact way, he told how 2 men had appeared in court, persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. So he was in trouble with the law, right? They had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It had worked. Wilson details the turmoil he felt, recounting questions of God and the spirit that led to both hesitation and a desire to embrace his friend's new way of life. Ultimately, he rejected the offering. And so you want to say, what offering? To accept God in his life. He cited his contempt for religion, the wars which had been fought, the burnings and chicanery that religious disputes had facilitated made me sick. That's what he said. And it was his friend's change, however, that convinced him. Obviously, Wilson realized Ebby's will had been unable to initiate such a transformation. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute, and that was none at all. Ebby's words would prove invaluable to the later development of the 12 steps. Quote, "Why don't you choose your own conception of God?" Well, that statement hit me hard, Wilson wrote. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. From the honesty of the unmanageability of his alcoholism to the open-mindedness of a spiritual solution, Bill Wilson was on his way. After another hospitalization for his alcoholism, he made the decision to turn his will and his life over to the care of God. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, and that without him I was lost. In 1938, Bill began to write what would become the first edition of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. He and Dr. Bob realized that they had discovered a way to help alcoholics get sober that actually worked. And by the end of 1937, they had split with the Oxford group and began raising funds for a new fellowship, Alcoholics Anonymous, which was first considered to be called the James Group, based on the Book of James, the Sermon on the Mount, and 1 Corinthians 13. When Bill got to chapter 5, How It Works, which details the 12 steps, he sat up one night with a pencil and pad and began with the 6 Oxford group tenets as his raw material. I set out to draft more than 6 steps, he wrote later. How many more? I did not know. I relaxed and asked for guidance. With a speed that was astonishing considering my jangled emotions, I completed the first draft. It took perhaps half an hour. The words kept right on coming. When I reached a stopping point, I numbered the new steps. They added up to 12. It was as if the Spirit of God himself was writing the steps. How many people have never read that? Yeah, your hand goes up.
Yeah.
Right? This capsulizes, this whole thing. Here's Drinking Buddy, and he says he never saw him fresh-skinned and alive and vital, right? Because he was his drinking buddy. And now he sees him in this condition, and yet he's got this glow, and he goes, "What's going on with you?" In fact, the story says he pushed his drink over to him, and he refused it. And he says, "Well, I got religion." Now, that statement has different connotations today than it did back then. It wasn't a bad thing, right? But he's opposed to it because he's got some opinions based on his grandfather's prejudices. And if you read the history of this thing, you find that out. But he has to admit that even though he doesn't like that idea, something is working in Ebby, right? And later he writes, by the way, he had to come to a point where he saw that religious people were right after all, right? And so he concedes to this idea that he's powerless, that he needs God in his life. All he has to do is be willing to need God, to make a beginning. That's a key statement, to make a beginning. The whole point of the 12 steps is to move on from the beginning and to continue to develop this relationship with God, right? A lot of people don't know that. They haven't got a clue. That is a rich piece of history right there. And there's so much more of it that is absolutely amazing, that will please the ear, believe me, of the person that believes in God, the person that claims Christianity as his faith, to the person that claims Judaism as their faith, to the person who claims Buddhism as their higher power in their life. I mean, all of the sacred writings and different faith groups can listen to this history and receive so much from it. Now, we as Christians on this show receive so much because we know the history goes back to Judeo-Christianity. But anybody can receive rich history from this. And I think, and Roger, let me ask you this, don't you think once you know that stuff, it enhances your life?
I don't think there's any question about it. The fact that Ebby said, I got religion, but he didn't mean it in the context that we think about it today.
Right.
But the fact that this is a spiritual program and we suffer from a spiritual problem, like Carl Jung so aptly explained, that it was a power. Well, it says that it's a power. We're beyond human aid, and it's a power beyond the physical. So if it's a spiritual problem, then it needs a spiritual solution. And to have a spiritual solution, you need God in your life. And so, yeah, it changed it. Like I said, I was 12 years sober when I started to get in touch with the history. It blew me away. Mm-hmm. It changed my whole outlook on recovery, the 12 steps, the program, everything. It changed everything.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
and I think that principle that, rings in my head because my sponsor drilled it in my brain. There's two things. One, the book tells us that open-mindedness, willingness, and humility are the essential ingredients of the program. So am I willing? Am I open-minded? And am I a little humble to investigate truth? And second of all, there's a principle, contempt prior to investigation is a principle, bar against all information, that will keep us in everlasting ignorance. That hit me like a ton of bricks because I literally, my entire life before I got sober, 44 years, contempt prior to investigation, 100%.
So, yeah, I get that. I mean, one of the things that was said to me by my sponsor years ago, and I try to pass this on to people I work with now, but I'll never forget it. He told me, he asked me what my spiritual background was. And I says, well, many years ago, I turned my life over to Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And he said, okay, I want you to take everything you think and know that you know about everything, including that, and I want you to put it in an imaginary box and give it to me. I said, what? Even what I think I know about God? And he goes, absolutely. Because if you're wrong, there needs to be some things worked out. If you're right, no harm done. So I agreed to that. And you know what I found out? There was a ton of stuff I even thought I knew about Jesus that I was wrong about. Right?
Me too.
And being willing to, and he's one of these guys that showed me, his name was Doug. And Doug was one of these guys that started showing me the history that was behind the 12-step movement. And got me really interested. And then I started listening to these other people like Myers and Chris R. and Chris S. and some of these other folks. I was just blown away by it. And it has done nothing but enhance my program. Derek, this is the first time you've heard that article.
Correct.
What stood out to you there?
Wow, it's inspirational. It really is. What stood out to me is that he drew the revelation from the book of James, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Beatitudes in the Gospel of Matthew and the love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13. Pretty powerful. And you cannot deny the testimony of a changed life. I mean, and then that hope, and like he would have suggested, it's all about, regardless of what you're struggling with, we're all sinners, and every walk of life, in that context, a surrender to the living God is where it's at. Like you heard here, it's a holistic approach, right?
Sure.
And so, yeah, amen. It's pretty fascinating. Yeah, very encouraging.
Yeah, very, very encouraging. Again, I'm going to reference this book, New Light on Alcoholism, God, Sam Shoemaker, and AA by Dick B. This is a pretty heavy duty book. If you're looking at YouTube, you can see it's pretty thick. But there is just amazing information in here. I recommend it to anybody, regardless of your belief system, regardless of any of that stuff. You're going to find some amazing material in this book. These books, by the way, are available on Amazon, and also you can get them through dickbeyondrecovery.com. There's lots of literature. There are copies of the original manuscripts. There are copies, just as of the last 10 years, I think it's maybe even a little longer, there's been a reprinting of the first edition of the big book. But there's just a wealth of information. There's no reason not to look into it. You can get this stuff on what do you call it? We don't use cassettes anymore. Audio. There we go. That's the word I was looking for. Audio as well. You know what? When I'm in a 12-step meeting and my ears perk up when people start talking about the rich history of this thing. I love it when there's big book studies, and I'm not talking about big book shares where you read a paragraph and then you talk about your day. I'm talking about literal studies where the big book is opened up and we study it. You know, we read it for what it says and we really study it. That stuff is priceless, absolutely priceless. And, you know, how do you get to know somebody? You study them, right? How do you get to know a fellowship that is so amazing like this? You study it. Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, most all your 12-step fellowships, faith-based or otherwise, have a variety of people from a variety of walks of life, right? And we're not all going to agree on some things. But one of the things that we can absolutely agree on, I believe, is that in the case of alcoholism, it is a medical problem with a spiritual solution. And how you approach that, you know, how much you know about the way this program works is going to determine how you approach it. So just going to meetings and listening to people share about their problems, that's not working a program.
No.
That's attending meetings, and that's important. It's important. I mean, you got to have, Chris Sess said to me the other day, he says, yeah, we're a program of attraction rather than promotion, but you got to have something that's attracting. You can't hide in the basements of your churches and meeting halls. You got to have something that's attracting people to it, right? Yeah. And so, you know, the meetings are absolutely essential. But if that's all you're doing, man, I would just challenge you. You know, I've had people ask me, Derek, you know, gosh, Monty, you seem to have joy in your life. You enjoy life. You enjoy doing this program and so forth and so on. Why is that? Because I keep my nose in it. That's why. I just don't show up once a week, you know, to open the door, so to speak. But we keep our nose in it as well. Roger, let's talk about the variety of different kinds of people in the 12-step rooms. Do you see any problem at all with having people from different belief systems really plugging into the history, even though much of this history is Judeo-Christianity?
No, not at all. Here's the thing about the 12 steps is that I'm into reporting and testifying. Like Derek said earlier, you testify to change lives.
Yeah.
You know, that's the issue. It's like, why are there close to, I think, 300 12-step programs or something that work? Because the 12 steps work and address the core issue, which is the fact that we're out of relationship with our Heavenly Father. That's the bottom line. And so, yeah, it's like I like Dick B used to say, I don't have opinions and I don't editorialize. I'm a reporter of the truth. And that hit me in the head like a brick. I don't have any opinion. I have opinions, but they're of no interest in the meeting place or working with a sponsee. It's like, let's talk about truth. Let's talk about why does it always work when you do it. Let's talk about those testimonies, and then you do the research, and the rich history testifies to that.
Yeah. I
mean, that thing you read this morning, I had heard bits and pieces of that, but not the entirety.
Yeah.
So yeah, please send me a copy of that when we get done.
Sure. Yeah, you betcha.
It's all about reporting what happens when we do it. It's like, how can somebody say that it doesn't work if they've never done it?
Yeah, and that's usually what happens is people that say it doesn't work haven't done it. That's what happens a lot. Oh, I tried AA or I tried NA or CR or whatever, and it's just not for me. It just didn't. It didn't. It didn't work. Well,
if you don't recognize the problem, there is no solution.
No. And so why? How often were you going? Well, I went a couple times.
Yeah.
And I didn't, and one of the complaints that I hear is, they were all talking about drinking or they were all talking about using it. How am I supposed to get clean and sober when all they talk about is drugs? How many times have you gone? Well, twice, 3 times.
Find another meeting.
Find another meeting.
Yeah.
There's hundreds and hundreds of them.
Right.
If you get food poisoning at a restaurant, you don't stop going out to eat.
Right. And you said it more than once. There's this lie that says that attending a meeting equates sobriety. That's not the case.
That's
There's
right.
work that has to be done. Just showing up week in and week out doesn't set you free.
No, it's a good place to start.
Great place to start. A willingness, at
The
least.
program is not in the meeting. The program is in the book, and the 12 steps take place outside the rooms of the meetings. We come back to the meetings to testify and report how well the 12 steps work when I do them outside the meeting.
Yeah.
It's like people don't talk about that. Sometimes don't talk about that at the meeting.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yep. Good point.
So in the chapter, how it works, on page 60, I'm looking at the 3rd edition here. On page 60, it says, our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. Now, before I say what those ideas are, it's interesting here what the author is referring to. The description of the alcoholic. Where's that? It's in the chapter of more about alcoholism. So you would have to go back and you'd have to read that chapter more about alcoholism to understand the description of the alcoholic. It's also in the doctor's opinion. So you need to look in the doctor's opinion to understand what our description of the alcoholic is. So that's one reference. The chapter to the agnostic. That chapter is called We Agnostics. That chapter talks very strongly about, the fact that there's lots of people. Agnosticism is just, I don't know. A meaning no and Gnostic meaning knowledge. I don't have knowledge of that. I'm not sure. I don't know. And that's a lot of us, right? I'm agnostic several times a week.
Right.
I claim Jesus as my higher power, but I'm constantly doubting him and questioning him and telling him how to run my life, right? So I get it. I get we agnostics, man. I'm agnostic too. But you got to read that chapter and understand what that is. And our personal adventures. What's he talking about there? The stories in the back of the book. Before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. So you can't understand these next 3 ideas if you don't read those other chapters. How can you? And what are those pertinent ideas? A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. That's step 1. So you can't understand the principle of step 1 until you've read the description of the alcoholic, the chapter of the agnostic, and the personal stories. Oh, I didn't know that. Think about that. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. So
I smile at the word probably.
I do too. Well, you know why he
alcoholic, Bill had to write that in there.
He had to put that in there because you got to be a little gentler, and see that God could and would if he were sought. It's interesting. The original manuscript didn't say God could and would if he were sought. It said God can and will.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't based on you. It was based on him. Right. He had to put that in there because Bill was very determined that you needed to follow directions.
Mm-hmm.
Because God won't render you white as snow without your cooperation. So you need to follow directions. So that was a good call.
Mm-hmm.
And then it says, being convinced. We read step 3. How can you be convinced of A, B, and C if you haven't read the description to the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and the personal stories?
Mm-hmm.
You can't. When I work with somebody using this piece of literature, I go back to the introductions and so forth, and where it talks about going back and reading the stories before we ever get to how it works.
Mm-hmm.
And so just the big book of AA, if you read no other literature, you've got to digest this whole thing, really, really get into it. Mm-hmm. And you'll have more than enough to become passionate about the program, which is the literature itself. Once you become passionate about the directions, right, it becomes an exciting venture to follow them and to give them away and be willing to share them with others and to watch a fellowship grow up around you, right, of people that do not normally mix, who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. But if you just read how it works and that's all you ever read, you're cheating yourself.
Yeah.
Roger.
Yes.
How you doing, buddy?
I believe, Monty. I believe. I'm all in.
So the importance of 12-step history is just that. It is vitally important. And I would hope that this, regardless of what your belief systems are, regardless of what you believe spiritually, regardless of whether you're convinced that you have a problem with narcotics or alcohol or pornography or shopping or whatever it is, right? That whatever program or whatever fellowship that you are involved in, if you're an Al-Anon, for instance, you need to read the history of Al-Anon. You need to plug yourself into the rich history of that program. If it's Celebrate Recovery, get on board. Listen to Pastor Baker, right?
Yeah.
Listen to some of his videos. He's no longer with us. A couple years ago now?
Seems like.
Yeah, passed on. If you're in Narcotics Anonymous, learn the history. It's amazing stuff. You can sit down with the founders of NA and the co-founders of AA, and you would find that these guys actually got along, believe it or not. It's just amazing stuff. Yeah, and I hope this helps you and encourages you to look deeper, because I think once you look deeper, you'll never get enough of it. Derek, closing thoughts.
I was just thinking, I likened it unto a place of employment. If you're prone to a denomination within the body of Christ, I mean, I say that to say this: I want to do a little research. If I'm going to be a part of a group or be excited about a movement, whatever that may look like, feel like, understanding the roots of that, I think for me is tremendously important. So do your research, right? And then I was thinking, what a challenge to an already leader in a small group context, or maybe somebody who's considering entering into a leadership role in the atmosphere of AA and AA, right? And or even if you're just a group attender, man, dive in to this insight, this information, be encouraged. But if you are a leader, you want to enhance your group, the unity and the flavor, and bring that inspiration, bringing that to the table and sharing that and diving into that as a group, I think will spur on what brother said in California, the idea of talking about the fruit in the recovery, which is so exciting, rather than just all the trauma and the drama that nobody wants to listen to. I think there's a time and a place for that as well.
Yeah.
But bringing to the table, hey, this has been my experience, man, and these are the victories that I'm walking in, and in that you're encouraged, and you bring something that's delightful, people are intrigued in and want to come back and participate in. Yeah. And so I think it starts with the foundation, the basics there. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
It was is good. This
Yeah.
has been great this morning.
Yeah, right on. Good deal. Good deal. Roger, closing thoughts.
Yeah, dig in, search and research, we're told, and find out the truth about the program and the history, and then start applying things to your life. And what happens is you get happy, joyous, and free, and you get so full of hope that you want to share it with somebody else. But you can't share anything you haven't got. So dig in, start researching, read the stories, look at the history. It changes. It literally changes everything. It puts everything in life in relationship with God in context. And that's been that journey that we read about in the book, and the journey that we're on as we trudge this road of happy destiny. I can't get enough of it, and I love it, and it drives me every day from the time I wake up to the time I go to sleep.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing.
So my closing thoughts to this is a warning. Because I've been that guy. And what guy am I talking about? The guy that reads this stuff and starts really digging into it, and then goes to a meeting and sees people doing the opposite and becomes a right fighter for the program and starts dictating to people how they need to do it. Don't become that guy at group level. Nice. Don't become that guy in the meeting, okay? Because if you do that, all of a sudden you start getting puffed up, and oh man, they're not following these traditions, and they're not doing this right, and they're not doing. Chris S said something to me the other day, and I'll never forget it. He says, I think it takes all kinds of meetings, even the crazy ones. I think it takes all kinds of meetings to get to really the people that need the help, right? I wouldn't have agreed with that several years ago. I think he's right. But once you're armed with the truth and the facts and the history, then you can pass that on to people you work with, and you can help teach them that stuff. Or if you're in a meeting that does a deep study into this kind of thing, that's a little different. But please don't take this as something to arm yourself with so you can go on the attack of correcting people. Sitting in a group meeting, because let me tell you something, it won't be received. I have been there. I have done that.
Yeah, me too.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's not an attraction.
That is not an attraction. No, not at all. I have some some people I highly respect in my life here in the Willamette Valley that do not agree at all with my spiritual program. But you know what? I can go sit down and have coffee with them, those guys. We are sober. We're talking about good stuff. It's healthy. We are we're not even on the same page politically. And yet, because of the fellowship of people in recovery, we don't need to be the right fighter with each other. We just don't need to. Right. I'm thinking of one guy right now, a Jewish brother. And I see his Facebook posts, and boy, if we were to sit down and talk politics, we'd probably wring each other's necks. But you know what? It's unnecessary. We don't need to do it. We have something else much more powerful in common, and that is this living in a state of recovered, surrounding ourselves with the recovery community, reaching out with the hand of our particular fellowship to be there for those who still suffer. And upon that, we can absolutely agree. And I appreciate that guy. He works in the field. He works with others. And I consider him a good friend. If you want those kinds of relationships with people, man, you can find it within the recovery fellowships. If you want a war, you can find that too. Yeah. But it's going to be up to you. It's going to be up to you. All right. Our closing song this week is by Mike O'Brien, and it's called "Stay on the Train." Comes from an old slogan. The view out there will change if you just stay on the train, kind of thing. Listen, if you're frustrated, maybe you're frustrated with your recovery, maybe you're frustrated with other people in your life or whatever, don't jump ship. Don't get off the train. Stay on the train. The scenery will change sooner or later. Yep. All right. Here is that song by Mr. Mike O'Brien.
It's a hell of a day coming down on me. Didn't see it coming. Now it's surrounding me. But you know what they say, if you stay on the train long enough, the view will change. And that hell of a day I turn to heaven. There's a devil inside, and he's talking out loud. He's telling me it's no use, why not throw in the towel? But you know what they say, if you stay in your head long enough, you're bound to be misled. And the devil inside will steal your heaven. But you had it coming. You let down your guard. You must find your heaven right now. But you know what they say, if you stay in your head long enough, you're bound to be misled. Yeah, you know what they say, if you stay on the train long enough, the view will change. And that hell of a day I turn to heaven. So don't you cry, don't you fret, better days are coming yet. Don't you worry, don't you stress, you'll soon be out of this mess. So don't you cry, don't you fret, better days are coming yet. And your hell of a day will soon be heaven. Here comes heaven right now. You know what they say, stay on the train. Here comes heaven right now. Stay on the train, stay on the train, stay on the train.
The soul-searching music of Mr. Mike O'Brien. You can get more of his music and listen to this amazing talent, our good friend Mike, at reverbnation.com/Mike O'Brien. That's spelled O-B-R-Y-A-N. All right. Until our next broadcast, this is the Monty Man, along with my co-host and all of the Take 12 Recovery Radio family. And we are wishing God's perfect serenity for you.
This has been a broadcast of KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.
kitty, 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 kitty.